My sister waited until I was standing in front of her new husband, his billionaire father, and half the people she wanted to impress before she decided to explain what was wrong with me. Camille slipped her arm through mine and smiled. "This is Merit, my older sister," she said. "Our family's cautionary tale." A few people laughed. She wasn't finished. Dad spent years teaching her the business. She got good enough to think she was too good for us, walked away, and now she gets paid to make spreadsheets and tell other people what they're doing wrong. More laughter followed, softer this time, the kind people gave when they weren't sure whether they had permission. My mother's smile tightened. "Camille," she said, but she was laughing too. My father raised his champagne glass toward me. "Don't be too hard on her. Merit has always been talented at one thing." Camille's eyes brightened. She knew where he was going. "Disappointing you?" Dad chuckled. "Consistently." That one landed harder. Because he wasn't pretending anymore. Camille squeezed my arm as if she had just paid me a compliment. "So, yes," she told her new in-laws, "I'm the daughter who stayed. Merit is the one we use to scare the younger cousins into making better life choices." The table laughed again. For most of my life, I had known exactly what came next. I would smile, say something self-deprecating, protect my parents from looking cruel and my sister from looking petty. Then I would spend the drive home wondering why being humiliated always became my responsibility to make comfortable. That night, I didn't smile. And that was when Victor Lang stopped smiling too. He stared at me across the table. "Merit Shaw?" Camille's arm was still hooked through mine. "Yes," I said. Victor leaned forward. "You ran the procurement recovery on our headquarters project." The laughter died. My father lowered his glass. Victor glanced at him and then back at me. "The headquarters downtown. When our primary supplier failed halfway through the package, you rebuilt the procurement sequence." Camille slowly let go of my arm. Victor's expression sharpened with recognition. $200 million, dozens of vendors, and half the executive team demanding dates no one could defend. He gave a short laugh. "You were the woman who refused to give us one." I remembered that meeting. 12 people around a glass conference table. 3 executives demanding a replacement schedule by the end of the day. A supplier collapse that had erased 8 weeks of assumptions in less than 48 hours. I had brought 3 scenarios instead of one promise. One aggressive and expensive. One slower, but defensible. One somewhere in the middle, if legal and operations accepted the risk. The president of construction had accused me of being pessimistic. Victor had asked me which date I would put my own name under. I had pointed to the middle option. That was the one they chose. "Apparently," he remembered. "You kept that project moving," Victor said. Nobody at the table laughed now. Camille recovered first. "Well," she said lightly, "apparently Merit had a much more glamorous job than she ever told us." I looked at her. "I told you exactly what I did." The sentence was quiet enough that she couldn't accuse me of making a scene. Her smile held for another second, then thinned. I stepped away before she could turn the moment back into another joke. I had been at the wedding for less than 3 hours, and already I was tired in the familiar way that had nothing to do with standing in heels. At 40, I should have been immune to it. That was what I had told myself while fastening my earrings in my condo that afternoon. You have your own home, your own career, your own paycheck. A sister's seating chart cannot make you 17 again. Then I had reached the reception hall and found my place card at a table near the back, with 2 distant cousins, one of Daniel's former professors, and a couple I had never met. Not beside my parents. Not near Camille. Not even near the cluster marked immediate family. I had stared at the card for half a second too long. Then a coordinator hurried past me, carrying a stack of revised table numbers. "Excuse me," I had said automatically. "Table 12 is missing 2 place settings." She froze. "Oh my God, thank you." And just like that, 15 minutes after arriving as a guest, I was fixing somebody else's problem. That was the part my family had always understood about me. Not what I did. What I could repair. A crooked seating plan. A supplier schedule. A contract clause. A crisis nobody wanted attached to their own name. By the time dinner ended, I had almost convinced myself Victor's recognition was the strangest thing that would happen that night. Then my mother found me near the edge of the ballroom. Merit. The way she said my name made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. Elaine Shaw could put 3 different meanings into 2 syllables. This one meant she needed something. "There's a problem with the late-night catering," she said. "The coordinator says there's an additional service charge Camille never approved." I glanced across the room. The wedding coordinator stood 20 feet away talking to a server. "Then she should handle it." Mom blinked. "You're good with contracts." "I am. So just look at it." There it was. Not please. Not would you mind. Just the old assumption that competence was community property. "The coordinator is right there," I said. Mom stared at me, as though I had refused to help someone choking. "It would take you 5 minutes. Then it should only take her 5 minutes. Her mouth tightened. "This is your sister's wedding." "I know." I smiled once, politely, and walked toward my table. My hands were colder than they should have been. It was such a small refusal that nobody else would have noticed. But I did. Because 5 years earlier, I had spent most of Christmas Eve reviewing a vendor indemnification clause for my father, while Camille took family photos downstairs. 3 years before that, I had missed the first half of a friend's engagement dinner because Dad needed me to just check a subcontractor's payment schedule. 20 minutes always became 2 hours. 5 minutes always became whatever the family needed. And afterward, nobody remembered the favor. Only the next emergency. I sat down and turned my phone face down beside my plate. It vibrated less than a minute later. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the sender, a procurement manager whose name I recognized from a Lang Group vendor network. The subject line read, "Verification of proposed advisory personnel Shaw Architectural Millwork." I stared at my father's company name. For a moment, I assumed it was a mistake. Shaw Architectural Millwork had no connection to my current employer beyond operating in the same broad construction ecosystem. Dad's company fabricated custom architectural interiors. I worked for Northline Project Advisory, managing procurement strategy for commercial development programs. Related industries. Very different roles. I opened the message. The language was routine. The procurement team was conducting reference and personnel verification for a current vendor submission. They wanted confirmation that I presently maintained an external strategic advisory relationship with Shaw Architectural Millwork and would be available for limited support if the firm were selected. I read the paragraph again. Then a third time. My fork rested against the edge of my plate. I had never been an external strategic advisor to Shaw Millwork. I had never signed a consulting agreement, never billed them, never told anyone I was available for a current bid. The band shifted into another song behind me. Chairs scraped. Someone laughed near the bar. Across the room, Camille was dancing with Daniel. Dad stood beside one of Daniel's uncles, his hand on the man's shoulder, smiling like tonight had proved every decision he had ever made about his daughters. I looked back at the email. There was a button beneath the verification request, asking me to confirm the information. I didn't touch it. Instead, I typed, "I'm unable to confirm the advisory relationship described below. Please send me the specific proposal section or personnel statement referencing me so I can review the representation accurately." I reread the sentence twice before sending it. That was another habit Dad hated. "Do you need a written record of every breath you take?" he had once asked me. At work, version control kept projects from collapsing under competing assumptions. At home, written records had always been treated like an accusation. The reply came faster than I expected. An attachment. Fourpage. I opened the first one. Then I stopped hearing the band. At the top of the page was the Shaw Millwork logo. Below it, key advisory resources. And there I was. My corporate headshot. Not an old photograph from when I had worked for Dad. My current Northline photograph, the one taken 11 months earlier. Underneath it, Merit Shaw, Director of Strategic Procurement, Northline Project Advisory. External Strategic Procurement Advisor, Shaw Architectural Millwork. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. The biography underneath was carefully written. Technically accurate facts arranged to create a false relationship. More than 15 years of procurement and vendor management experience. True. Complex commercial construction programs. True. Lang Group headquarters, approximately $200 million. True. Available to support strategic procurement, vendor coordination, and project delivery planning as required. Not true. I zoomed in. They had not simply mentioned that I used to work at Shaw. They had presented me as a current resource. My current employer's title was being used to strengthen my father's bid. My current photograph was being used to make the claim look legitimate. And the same project Camille had mocked me for working on 20 minutes earlier was sitting beneath my name as proof that Shaw Millwork had access to my expertise. Someone touched my shoulder. I nearly dropped the phone. Camille stood beside me, cheeks flushed from dancing. There you are. I locked the screen. What do you need? The question came out automatically. Camille laughed. God, Merritt. Not everything is a work emergency. The irony was almost enough to make me answer. Almost. Instead, I put the phone into my clutch. Good. She studied my face. Are you still upset about what I said to Victor? No. You looked upset. I was embarrassed. Her smile became sympathetic in the way only Camille could make feel insulting. It was a joke. I know you intended it as one. There. See? She touched my forearm. You always make everything sound like a deposition. I looked at her hand until she removed it. Enjoy your wedding, Camille. She hesitated. You're leaving early? I've been here 7 hours. Mom will say you're proving her point. That sentence would once have worked. It would have kept me there another 2 hours, smiling for photographs I would later be cropped from or standing beside people who had spent the evening laughing at me. I picked up my clutch. Mom is allowed to have a point. Camilla stared. I kissed her cheek. Congratulations. Then I left. The drive back to Chicago took a little under an hour. I kept the radio off. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. 40 years old. Director in my field. Homeowner. Trusted with contracts worth more than anything my parents had ever imagined when they first opened Shaw Millwork. And one sentence from Camille could still make part of me feel like I had failed an exam whose rules nobody had ever explained. The worst part was that my family had never really called me incompetent. Not when they needed something. When Dad had a difficult contract, he called me. When Elaine needed wording checked, she emailed me. When Camille had a client asking technical questions she couldn't answer, my phone rang. They only called me difficult after the problem was solved. I pulled into my garage and sat there with the engine off. 3 years earlier, after the Lang headquarters crisis, Dad had called while I was still in the car outside Northline. I had been awake for nearly 20 hours. You still doing that office project? He had asked. The Lang headquarters. Right, the cabinet thing. It's more than cabinets. He had laughed. You always did like making simple things complicated. I had let it go. That was what I did then. I let him shrink the thing rather than risk sounding proud of myself. Tonight, Victor Lang had described my work more accurately in 30 seconds than my father had in years. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt stupid. Because my family apparently understood the value of the Lang project perfectly well. They had put it in a proposal. Upstairs, I changed out of my dress and tied my hair back. Then I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. I created a folder. Shaw Advisory Claim. Inside it, I saved the verification email, the 4-page excerpt, the original attachment metadata, my response. Then I opened the proposal again. I did what I had been trained to do whenever a statement made me uneasy. I stopped reacting to the conclusion and examined the structure. Who was being represented? Me. What was being claimed? A current external advisory relationship. What evidence supported it? My biography, title, photograph, and project history. What was missing? Consent. Agreement. Scope. Availability. I scrolled to the bottom of the page. A small line of gray text sat beneath the footer. I had overlooked it at the wedding because I had been too focused on seeing my own face. Proposal Revision 7. My fingers stopped above the keyboard. Revision 7. Not draft. not preliminary concept. 7. I leaned back. Until that moment, part of me had still been looking for the explanation that would make this small. A careless marketing person. An outdated biography. A sentence Robert thought was harmless. But someone had opened this proposal 6 previous times. Someone had reviewed it, updated it, changed it, and at some point, they had found my current photograph, my current Northline title, and the exact project credential Victor Lang had recognized at the wedding. My phone lit up on the counter. Family group chat. Camille had posted a photograph, she and Daniel beneath the lights, my parents beside them. Caption: the people who always show up. My thumb hovered over the notification. For years, I would have opened it. I would have wondered whether it was about me. I would have drafted an explanation nobody had asked for. Instead, I muted the chat. Then, I opened my calendar and booked the earliest available meeting with Northline Compliance for Monday morning. I still hadn't called my father. That was deliberate. For once, Robert Shaw was not going to get the first chance to tell me what had happened. I looked again at the words at the bottom of the proposal. Revision set. My family hadn't just used my name. They had apparently had at least 6 opportunities to decide whether to take it out. Monday morning, I arrived at Northline 22 minutes early. I knew because I checked the clock in the parking garage twice before turning off the engine. The building was still quiet when I stepped into the elevator. My heels made small, sharp sounds against the concrete, louder than they should have at that hour. I had slept badly, but not in the dramatic way people described sleepless nights. I had not paced my condo or cried into a pillow. I had simply woken every 40 minutes with the same sentence already waiting for me. External Strategic Procurement Advisor. By 6, I had stopped pretending I was going back to sleep. The folder on my laptop had grown by 3 files since Saturday night. I had saved the original email as a PDF, downloaded the proposal excerpt without changing the file name, and exported the message headers because that was what I did when a document might later matter. Dad used to call that kind of thing obsessive. At Northline, people called it documentation. Helen Park's office was on the 15th floor, 2 levels above mine. She was already there when I arrived, reading something on one monitor while drinking coffee from a white ceramic mug. She looked up when I knocked. Merit. Comine. Helen was Northline's director of compliance. She was in her late 50s, wore narrow black glasses, and had the unnerving habit of letting silence sit until people stopped decorating their answers. I closed the door behind me. Thank you for meeting this early. You marked the request as time-sensitive. I think it is. That was all she needed. I opened my laptop, turned it toward her, and started with the verification email. I did not begin with Camille's wedding. I did not tell Helen that my sister had called me a cautionary tale in front of a billionaire. I did not tell her about my father's champagne glass or the photograph Camille had posted afterward. Those things mattered to me. They did not establish what Northline needed to know. Helen read the email once, then the proposal page. Her eyes stopped on my photograph. This is current? Yes. Your headshot? Taken last year. And this title is correct? Yes. She tapped the line beneath it. External Strategic Procurement Advisor. No. Helen looked at me. No as in inaccurate title? Or no as in no relationship? No relationship. No written consulting agreement? No. No compensation? No. No verbal agreement to advise on this bid? No. Her finger moved down the page. Then she asked the question I had been dreading since Saturday night. Have you ever performed work for Shaw Architectural Millwork since joining Northline? The answer I wanted was no. A clean answer. A safe answer. Instead, I looked at the proposal page and said, I've helped them. Helen waited. They're my parents' company. I worked there before Northline. Since I left, my father has occasionally sent me a contract section or a schedule question. My mother has asked me to proofread proposal language. My sister has called with vendor questions. How often? Not on a schedule. That isn't what I asked. I folded my hands on the table. Sometimes months went by. Sometimes I'd hear from them twice in one weekend. Were you paid? No. Were you presented to their clients as part of the team when you provided that help? Not that I knew. Did you ever attend a client meeting on their behalf after joining Northline? No. Send a deliverable directly to one of their clients? I thought. Not that I remember. I usually sent comments back to Dad or Elaine. Usually? There may have been 1 or 2 times years ago when I answered a supplier question on an email thread. I would need to check. Helen nodded. No accusation. No reassurance either. What does your employment agreement say about outside activity? I know the policy. Tell me what you understand it to mean. It felt absurdly like an oral exam, except the consequences were attached to the career I had spent 12 years building. Outside advisory work involving construction vendors, procurement, or clients in overlapping sectors has to be disclosed and approved in advance, paid or unpaid if the work creates a conflict or could reasonably appear to. And use of Northline's name? They can't use my current title or Northline affiliation to market another company's services without approval. Helen leaned back. That's my concern. Not the insult. Not the wedding. Not whether Dad thought he had earned lifelong access to me. The concern was simple. A bidder was presenting a Northline director as an available resource. I had never disclosed such a role, because I had never agreed to one. Helen folded her glasses and set them on the desk. What do you want to do first? The question surprised me. First? Northline can refer this to legal now. That's an option. Before I do that, I want to know whether you have any reason to believe this can be corrected quickly, without misrepresenting what happened. I looked at the page again. The old reflex rose immediately. Let me talk to Dad. Let me calm everyone down. Let me fix it before strangers get involved. I hated how natural that instinct still felt. I'd like 72 hours, I said. Helen did not answer immediately. To do what? Ask Shaw in writing. To identify every active place they're using my name, remove any representation that I'm an advisor, and correct the current bid. You are not going to review the bid for them. No. You are not going to rewrite the language. No. You are not going to help them produce replacement personnel qualifications. No. Each answer felt heavier than the last. Helen put her glasses back on. I'll keep the compliance record open. You send me whatever you receive. If they refuse to correct it, if we find additional material using Northline's name, or if someone asks you to perform work for them while this is under review, this gets escalated. I understand. One more thing. I stopped gathering my papers. If they send you something to sign, do not sign it before we review what it is. My hand rested on the edge of the laptop. Why would they send me something to sign? Helen's expression barely changed. Because if someone has been representing a relationship that wasn't documented, one obvious way to make the paperwork cleaner is to create documentation afterward. The room seemed colder. I won't sign anything. Good. I left Helen's office with 72 hours and a problem that no longer belonged only to the Shaw family. The elevator doors closed in front of me. For the first time since the wedding, I let myself think the sentence I had been avoiding. If Dad had made a careless mistake, he could correct it. If he refused, then the mistake was not the real issue. Back at my desk, I opened an archive folder I had not touched in months. Shaw family. The name embarrassed me now. I had folders for everything. Active projects, completed projects, professional development, taxes, insurance, condo records. And then there was Shaw. Not a project. Not employment. Not consulting. Just family. As if that word made scope unnecessary. The oldest files went back to my 20s. I clicked one. A supplier comparison spreadsheet appeared, dated almost 17 years earlier. For a second, the fluorescent light above my office disappeared. I was 23 again, sitting at the chipped kitchen table in the first house my parents owned after Shaw Millwork began making real money. Dad had spread supplier quotes around his dinner plate. We need these normalized by morning, he had said. I had been home for the weekend. My actual plan had been to drive back Sunday afternoon because I had a certification class early Monday. Instead, I stayed until almost midnight. Dad paced between the refrigerator and the table while I converted unit pricing, separated freight, and found 2 exclusions that made the cheapest quote, not cheap at all. When I finished, he looked at the comparison sheet and whistled. That's my girl. 3 words. I had driven home exhausted and happy. It embarrasses me now how little it took. Not because I was foolish. Because I was young enough to believe usefulness was a form of intimacy. The next folder contained schedules, scope comments, proposal drafts. Years of them. At Shaw, titles had supposedly not mattered. Dad loved saying that. We're small enough that everybody does what needs doing. It sounded democratic until Camille joined the company. Her titles changed almost every 18 months. Sales coordinator, business development manager, director of client relations, then head of sales. Nobody said titles did not matter when hers were printed on a new business card. Mine remained vague even when I was doing work that kept major bids from unraveling. I remembered one client dinner in particular. The restaurant had white tablecloths and tiny lamps at every place setting. Shaw had just survived a brutal year. A customer delayed payment, 2 vendors tightened terms, and Dad had spent 3 months saying the company was one bad quarter away from layoffs. I had rebuilt purchasing forecasts with our bookkeeper, negotiated revised supplier schedules, and spent enough nights at the office that the cleaning crew knew how I took my coffee. At dinner, Dad stood to introduce us. He put his hand on Camille's shoulder. This one's the future face of Shaw. Everyone applauded. Camille had been with the company less than 2 years. Later, in the parking lot, I asked Dad when we were going to talk about the operations role he had promised me. He looked genuinely puzzled. What role? You said once things stabilized. Merritt, don't start. I didn't start anything. I'm asking. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. You're good at what you do. That isn't an answer. You want an answer? Fine. Camille is good with people, clients like her. And you're more useful where you are. Useful. Not valued. Not promoted. Useful. At the time, I swallowed it because the company had just survived a bad year, because Dad was tired, because Camille was younger, because there was always a reason that made asking for myself feel selfish. The following spring, Northline offered me a position. I had almost turned it down. That memory came back with uncomfortable clarity as I opened the email containing the original offer. Northline had given me 4 days to decide. On the second night, Mom came into my old bedroom while I was packing clothes for work. You're actually considering it? She asked. Yes. Your father trained you. I know. He spent years building something you could have. I don't own Shaw. You know what I mean. No, Mom. I don't. She sat on the edge of the bed. What happens when your father needs you? There it was. Not what do you want? Not is this a good opportunity? What happens when Dad needs you? I accepted Northline's offer the next morning. For approximately 6 months afterward, Dad barely called unless something was wrong. Then the old pattern returned in smaller forms. Merritt, quick question. Merritt, can you look at one clause? Merritt, Camille has a client asking about procurement sequencing. Merritt, this will take 10 minutes. I told myself the favors proved I had left the company, without abandoning the people. The distinction mattered desperately to me then. So, I became very careful. When Elaine sent a document, I wrote things like, I can review the procurement language only. Or, I have about half an hour. I can't evaluate the whole proposal. Or, this isn't a formal review. I'm just flagging this. Dad mocked those sentences. You'd think we were strangers. I thought I was protecting both sides. What I had not understood was that he could preserve the favor and ignore the boundary around it. By lunchtime, I had created a spreadsheet. Date. Sender. Document. What I was asked to do. What I actually did. Whether I received compensation. Whether a client was copied. Whether I used Northline resources. It was not an investigation into my parents. It was an investigation into myself. That distinction mattered. If I had crossed a line, I needed to know before anyone else found it for me. I found 2 email threads where external suppliers had been copied after I answered technical questions. Both were years old. Neither presented me as a Shaw employee. I added them anyway. I found 7 proposal documents Elaine had asked me to proofread over the years. My comments were narrow. Typos. A contradictory schedule term. A vendor qualification sentence. None said I was reviewing the submission as a whole. Then I found something that made me sit back. An email from Robert from 3 years earlier. Subject: quick favor. Merit: can you glance at the procurement paragraph? Don't touch anything else. Elaine already has the rest done. I had responded. Sure. Send the paragraph. It should have reassured me. Instead, I felt something click into place. Dad understood scope perfectly well when scope limited my responsibility. He just disliked scope when it limited his access. By early afternoon, I had enough to write the questions I wanted answered. I did not call. I opened a new email. To Robert Shaw, Elaine Shaw, Camille Shaw. I kept it short. I had received a verification request regarding Shaw Architectural Millworks' current proposal. I needed 3 things confirmed in writing. Who added my name and current Northline title to the submission? Since when had Shaw represented me as an external advisor? What active marketing or proposal materials currently used my name, title, photograph, Northline affiliation, or project credentials? I read it 3 times. There was nothing angry in it. No mention of the wedding. No accusation of fraud. No threat. Just questions. Then I sent it. My phone rang 46 seconds later. Dad. I stared at his name until the call stopped. It rang again. Then, a text appeared. Call your father. A second message followed. Don't turn this into some corporate investigation. The wording sent a strange warmth up the back of my neck. I had asked 3 questions. Dad had heard an investigation. I typed, please, respond to the questions in writing. 3 dots appeared. Vanished. Appeared again. Then my phone rang a 3rd time. I turned it face down. At 3:17, Elaine answered by email. Merritt, I honestly do not understand why you're making this sound so sinister. You have helped the company for years. Everybody knows that. Nobody is claiming you work here full-time. I read the message carefully. Everybody knows that. It was the kind of phrase my mother used when she wanted disagreement to sound unreasonable. Below her paragraph, Dad had added 1 line. You have always advised us informally when needed. I highlighted the sentence. When needed. Now scope. No date. No distinction between reviewing 1 paragraph at his request and offering my current professional credentials to a client. Camille answered separately. I didn't create your page. I knew you were listed on this proposal, but I assumed Dad had cleared it with you. Can we please not make this a whole thing during my wedding week? I leaned back. That was the first direct answer anyone had given me. Camille knew I was listed. She claimed she believed Dad had permission. Whether I believed that completely was a different question. But her answer gave me something useful. She had not created the page. At least according to her. I would not treat that as proven. I would treat it as a statement to compare against the documents. The old version of me would have called Camille immediately. I would have said I was sorry this had spilled into her wedding week. I would have reassured her that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Instead, I saved the email. At 4, I checked Shaw Millworks' public website. The homepage looked almost exactly as I remembered it. Dad standing in the shop with rolled drawings under 1 arm. Camille beside a finished lobby installation. A photograph of the fabrication floor. I clicked Capabilities. A PDF downloaded. Capabilities 2025. Revision 6. The first pages covered fabrication, installation, project management, quality control. Then I reached the section titled Strategic Advisory Resources. My photograph stared back at me again. Same Northline headshot. Same title. Same Lang Group headquarters credential. My name had been sitting on Shaw's public website for 18 months. 18 months. Long enough to pass through annual updates. Long enough for someone to change project photographs. Long enough for Camille's title to be updated from Director of Client Relations to Head of Sales. Long enough for the document to reach Revision 6. My phone buzzed. Dad again. This time, he left a voicemail. I did not listen immediately. I copied the public URL, saved the PDF, recorded the access date, and forwarded both to Helen. Then I opened Dad's voicemail. Merritt, this is getting ridiculous. You've been helping us since before half the people at Northline knew what procurement was. We're not stealing anything from you. There are 40 people whose livelihoods depend on this company, so before you start firing off emails that could damage a bid, think about who you're actually hurting. The message ended. No answer to my questions. No offer to remove my name. 40 people. My jaw tightened. Dad had used that number before. Not always 40, sometimes 32, sometimes 38. The number changed as the company grew. The sentence did not. People are counting on you. When I was 26, it had made me skip an interview for a certification program because a production schedule collapsed. When I was 31, it kept me online through a friend's engagement dinner because a vendor dispute needed one more look. Now, I was 40, and the same sentence was being asked to carry a business representation I had never authorized. I opened a fresh email. This time, I did not ask a question. I stated a boundary. I did not authorize Shaw Architectural Millwork to present me as an employee, consultant, external advisor, or available project resource. I did not authorize use of my current Northline title, Northline affiliation, professional biography, photograph, or project experience to imply such a relationship. I asked that current materials be corrected and that I receive confirmation of where my information was actively being used. Before sending it, I forwarded the draft to Helen. She replied 10 minutes later. The substance is clear. Send it from your personal email, not your Northline account. Copy me only on your compliance record, not on the family correspondence. No legal threat. No grand intervention. Just a clean line between my employer's interests and my own communication. I sent it from my personal account. Dad responded less than 5 minutes later. You are overreacting. Elaine followed. This is humiliating. We are your parents, Merritt, not criminals. I stared at that sentence. I had not called them criminals. I had asked them to stop using my name. Camille's message came next. Mom is crying. Dad is furious. Is this really worth blowing up the family over? For a moment, my hand moved toward the phone. The old sequence was so deeply practiced that my body started it before my mind agreed. Call Mom. Calm Camille. Explain to Dad. Offer a compromise. Maybe say they can mention, I used to work there. Maybe review a new paragraph for them. Maybe just help fix the language. My hand stopped. Helen's words came back to me. You are not going to rewrite the language. I set the phone down. Sunday dinner was still on my calendar for that weekend. We had been doing it almost every week since Dad's mild knee surgery 2 years earlier, long after he had recovered. Elaine said it was good to keep everyone connected. Connected usually meant Camille arrived late. Dad asked me one work question after another, and I carried leftovers home in containers. Mom expected me to return washed. I opened the event. Family dinner Sunday. Then I deleted it. Not canceled. Deleted from my calendar. A minute later, I texted Elaine. I won't be there Sunday. Her reply was immediate. Because of this? I typed 3 different explanations. Erased all 3. Then wrote, yes. I need some space, while this is unresolved. The typing indicator appeared. Mom's answer came slowly. I don't know who you've become. I read it once, then locked the screen. For most of my life, that sentence would have frightened me. This time, another thought came first. Maybe she didn't. Maybe none of them did. Not because I had become someone new over the weekend. Because they had spent years knowing only the version of me who answered when called. Later that evening, I returned to the Capabilities PDF. Revision 6. Something about the number tugged at me. I searched my archived Shaw emails for the file name. 3 results appeared. One from Elaine, almost a year earlier. Merritt, can you proof this before I send it to the designer? Just the procurement terminology. Dad says you make this stuff sound less clunky. Attachment. Capabilities Statement Revision. 3. I felt my pulse change. There it was. A version I had actually touched. I downloaded it. The file opened side by side with revision 6. The first pages were familiar. I remembered correcting supply chain sequencing in one paragraph and flagging an inconsistent warranty term. I clicked through slowly. Fabrication, installation, project management, quality control. Then the page where strategic advisory resources appeared in revision 6. In revision 3, there was no such page. No photograph, no biography, no Northline title, no Lang Group headquarters. No mention of Merritt Shaw anywhere, except inside the metadata showing I had added comments to 2 paragraphs. I checked the email I had sent back to Elaine. Attached are my comments. I'm only reviewing the procurement language. My own sentence sat on the screen. Plain, boring, precise. Exactly the kind of sentence Dad had spent years teasing me for writing. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because anything was solved. It wasn't. But I had spent years listening to my family describe my need for clarity as coldness, rigidity, overthinking. And there, in black and white, was clarity doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It separated what I had agreed to from what somebody later decided I owed. Before closing my laptop, I opened my Northline professional portfolio. I had not updated the project summaries in months. The Lang Group headquarters entry was still modest to the point of absurdity. Supported procurement recovery during supplier transition. I stared at the sentence. Supported. It was the word I always chose when I was afraid accuracy might look like arrogance. I deleted it. Then I wrote, led procurement recovery following critical supplier failure, coordinating replacement sourcing, schedule risk scenarios, and vendor transition for a $200 million headquarters program. I read it once. Nothing in the sentence was inflated. Nothing belonged to Camille. Nothing belonged to Robert. Nothing needed to be made smaller so someone at Sunday dinner would feel more important. I saved the file. Then, I returned to the 2 capability statements. Revision 3 on the left. Revision 6 on the right. One I had actually reviewed. One carrying my face and my career. Whatever explanation Dad planned to give me next, he was no longer going to be able to tell me those were the same thing. Because this time, I had kept both versions. Revision 3 stayed open on the left side of my screen. Revision 6 sat on the right. At first glance, they looked almost identical. Same cover photograph of the fabrication floor. Same Shaw architectural millwork logo. Same typeface Dad had complained cost too much when Elaine hired the designer. Same photographs of paneled lobbies, conference rooms, reception desks, and custom millwork installations. That similarity was exactly what made the difference matter. I dragged the windows closer together and started at the beginning. Page 1 matched. Page 2 had minor copy changes. On page 3, a photograph had been replaced. Page 4 contained the procurement paragraph Elaine had asked me to review almost a year earlier. I opened my archived email beside it. Attached are my comments. I'm only reviewing the procurement language. There was my boundary in my own words. I checked the comments embedded in revision 3. One sentence about supplier qualification. One note about an inconsistent lead time. A question beside a warranty statement. Nothing else. No suggestion that I was part of Shaw's staff. No offer of future support. No permission to use Northline's name. I kept going. Revision 3 moved directly from project management into quality control. Revision 6 did not. Between those sections was a full page, titled Strategic Advisory Resources. My photograph occupied the upper left corner. Merritt Shaw, Director of Strategic Procurement, Northline Project Advisory. External Strategic Procurement Advisor, Shaw Architectural Millwork. Below that came the biography I had already seen, including the Lang Group headquarters. The wording was polished enough that someone unfamiliar with my situation would never think to question it. That bothered me more than an obvious lie would have. Nothing on the page said I worked full-time at Shaw. Nothing claimed Northline had assigned me to the company. Nothing was ridiculous enough to expose itself. Instead, every accurate fact about me had been arranged around one false implication: that I was available. That Shaw had access to me. That if a project became difficult enough, Merritt Shaw could be pulled in. I clicked the document properties. Revision 3 had been created before I reviewed it and modified after my comments were incorporated. Revision 6 had a later modification date. That did not tell me who added the advisory page. A designer could have edited the PDF. Elaine could have supplied the copy. Camille could have requested a stronger sales package. The file itself was not going to give me motive. So I made another table. I had learned a long time ago that when people argued about intention, dates were often more useful. Revision 3. I reviewed limited procurement wording. Revision 4. Unknown. Revision 5. Unknown. Revision 6. Public capability statement containing my name. Revision 7. Current Lang Group proposal containing an expanded version of the same claim. I stared at the blank cells between 3 and 6. Someone had made a decision in that gap. My phone was still quiet. That did not comfort me. Dad's silence usually meant one of two things. Either he had decided something did not deserve his attention, or he was waiting until he had a better argument. I downloaded clean copies of both PDFs and saved them in the compliance folder. Then I sent Helen a short message asking whether she had 10 minutes later that afternoon. Her reply came almost immediately. 3:30. Bring the versions. I was closing the email when Camille called. For several seconds, her name filled the screen. I had spent the past 2 days refusing phone calls because I wanted a written record. But this was different. Camille had already written that she knew I was listed in the current proposal and assumed Dad had cleared it with me. There was one question I wanted to hear her answer, without giving her time to polish it. I accepted the call. Hey. Camille did not bother with hello. Are you seriously not talking to Mom now? I talked to her yesterday. She says you canceled Sunday dinner. I did. There was a pause. You know she's taking that personally. That doesn't change why I canceled. Camille exhaled sharply. Merritt, can we talk like sisters for 5 minutes instead of like I'm one of your vendors? Sure. Then stop documenting everything I say. I looked at the 2 PDFs on my monitor. I didn't say I was documenting this call. You didn't have to. Her voice had the same polished irritation she used when a client wanted a concession she considered unreasonable. Camille had always been good at sounding warm while moving someone toward the answer she wanted. What are you actually angry about? She asked. The wedding or the proposal? The proposal. Really? Yes. Because you seemed pretty upset Saturday. I was embarrassed Saturday. That doesn't give anyone permission to use my job title. She made a small sound under her breath. You always do this. Do what? Separate everything into these little boxes so you can pretend none of it is emotional. I almost defended myself. Instead, I looked at revision 6. Who added the advisory page? Silence. Then Camille said, There it is. There what is? The interrogation. It's one question. I already told you I didn't create your page. That isn't what I asked. Her tone hardened. Why does it matter who physically typed it? It doesn't. I want to know who decided it belonged there. Another pause. Longer this time. Dad wanted the technical bench to look stronger. My hand stopped beside the keyboard. I did not speak immediately. Camille rushed into the silence. That doesn't mean he was trying to trick anyone. I didn't say it did. He wanted the proposal to reflect all the resources available to us. Was I available? You've helped before. That wasn't my question. Merritt. Was I available for the current project? She exhaled. I assumed he'd talked to you. Did you know my name was in the proposal before it was submitted? Yes. Did you ask whether I'd agreed? No. Why not? This silence had a different quality. When Camille answered, her voice was quieter. Because Dad was handling the technical side. That was not a complete answer, but it was useful. Did you know my Northline title was being used? Yes. And the Lang headquarters? Yes. Did you tell whoever prepared the proposal that Victor Lang might personally recognize that project? Oh, come on. I'm asking. No. Why would I? I thought about the wedding. Camille presenting me as the daughter who had escaped and disappointed everyone, while a sales proposal from her own company used the same project to make its technical team look stronger. The contradiction was almost too clean. Yet I still could not tell myself Camille had deliberately engineered it. I had her answer. Dad wanted the technical bench to look stronger. That was a statement from Camille, not proof. But it pointed somewhere. Thank you, I said. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. That's it? Yes. You call me, get what you want, and hang up? You called me. You know what I mean. I did. For years, a conversation with Camille had never been allowed to end while she felt uncomfortable. I had always stayed until she felt understood. She had never needed to extend the same courtesy to me. I have a meeting, I said. Of course you do. Camille. What? I asked a question. You answered it. I'm not going to fight with you just because you're expecting one. Her voice dropped. Dad is furious. I know. He thinks you're trying to humiliate him. I asked him to remove my name. Same thing, apparently. There was bitterness in that sentence that did not sound entirely directed at me. I noticed it. I did not build a story around it. Enjoy your honeymoon planning, I said. We postponed the trip. Okay, because this is happening. I closed my eyes for half a second. There it was again. A consequence someone else had chosen, being slid across the table toward me. I didn't ask you to postpone anything. You didn't have to. Then that's your decision. Camille Wenquier. For once, I let the silence remain hers. When the call ended, I wrote down exactly what she had said while it was still fresh. Dad wanted the technical bench to look stronger. I did not write. Dad ordered Camille to use my identity. I did not know that. Not yet. At 3:30, Helen stood beside my chair as I placed the two versions on her conference room screen. She leaned forward. So this is the one you reviewed? Revision 3. And this is the public version? Revision 6. I clicked through the pages. When we reached the advisory section, Helen said nothing. I showed her the old email next. Attached are my comments. I'm only reviewing the procurement language. Helen read it twice. Good. The word made me tense. Good for me? Useful for establishing scope. I almost laughed. Even Helen would not give me the emotional reassurance part of me wanted. Strangely, that helped. She was not there to tell me my parents were terrible. She was there to ask whether the record supported what I was saying. It did. I spoke with Camille, I said. Helen looked at me. She told me Dad wanted the technical bench to look stronger. Did you record the call? No. Then treat that as information, not independent evidence. I am. Helen nodded. Good. We continued through my chronology. Occasional emails over several years. No payments. No agreement. No regular reporting structure. No commitment to be available. 2 supplier threads where I had answered limited technical questions. Several clearly scoped document reviews. Helen stopped at one column. You said Northline's policy requires approval for outside business activity involving overlapping industry work. Yes. If your father sends you something now that formalizes an advisory role, the timing becomes important. I know. No, Merritt. I want you to understand exactly why. She turned the laptop slightly toward me. You disclosed that you did not have an advisory relationship. The records you've shown me are consistent with occasional informal help. If you sign something now saying that you have historically been an advisor or agreeing to future work tied to this bid, that becomes a new fact. A new outside business issue. Yes. My stomach tightened. And if the document says the relationship already existed, then we would have to ask why you disclosed the opposite. The sentence landed with more force than any threat Dad had made so far. Because this was not about whether Helen trusted me. It was about whether I gave Northline a reason not to. I won't sign anything. Helen held my gaze. Don't say that because you're angry at your family. Say it because you understand the professional consequence. I looked back at Revision 6. I understand. My phone vibrated on the table. Elaine. Not a call. An email. The subject line read, Proof you have always helped Shaw. Helen glanced at the notification but did not ask me to open it. I'll review it after this, I said. Forward anything relevant into the record. I will. Before I left, Helen closed the version comparison. Your 72 hours are almost up. I know. Have they corrected the public capability statement? Not yet. Then send one final request for confirmation. After that, Northline protects Northline. You protect your own decisions. The phrasing stayed with me all the way back to my office. Northline protects Northline. You protect your own decisions. Nobody was promising to rescue me. Nobody was asking me to rescue them either. I opened Elaine's email. There were 11 attachments. Her message began. Merritt, I am tired of you acting as though we invented this out of nowhere. You have advised this company for years. I pulled several examples, so maybe you will stop pretending your own parents took advantage of you. I leaned closer to the screen. For several minutes, I did exactly what she wanted. I opened examples of myself helping. A vendor schedule from 4 years earlier. A contract paragraph. A pricing clarification. A bid question response. The work was real. The favors were real. That mattered. I had no interest in rewriting history to make myself completely passive. I had answered. I had reviewed. I had returned calls. Sometimes I had volunteered before they even asked. That was the uncomfortable part. Boundaries I never enforced could not become someone else's responsibility retroactively. But none of those documents said I was permanently available. None gave Shaw authority to advertise me as current staff. Then I opened an email thread from a little more than a year earlier. Elaine had forwarded a designer's draft to Dad. The subject was Capability Statement Update. Several replies dealt with photographs and project descriptions. Then I reached a message from Robert. I read it once. My chair creaked when I shifted forward. Leave Merritt in the technical section. Clients know the Lang job. If we get into trouble, she'll help us like she always does. I did not move. There was no dramatic confession around it. No explanation. No villainous language. That was what made it worse. Dad had written the sentence as if he were deciding whether to keep a photograph. Leave Merritt in. Not ask Merritt. Not confirm Merritt. Leave her in. And then the second sentence. If we get into trouble, she'll help us, like she always does. A memory came back so quickly I could smell Dad's coffee. 6 years earlier. Sunday evening. I was preparing for a Northline presentation the next morning when he called. Quick question, he had said. I have 20 minutes. Perfect. 2 hours later, I was still at my dining table with Shaw documents covering half the surface. Dad had sent one issue, then another. A supplier exclusion. A schedule ambiguity. A badly worded obligation. Near the end, I told him I needed to stop. He laughed. That's why you're our secret weapon. I remembered smiling. Our. One word had fed me for years. I had heard affection, belonging, pride. Now, I looked at his email and heard the other meaning. A secret weapon was useful precisely because you kept it somewhere until you needed it. You did not ask whether the weapon had plans. I sat very still. The email did not prove every use of my name had been intentional. It did prove something narrower and more important. Dad knew my presence made their materials stronger. He had chosen to keep me in. And his backup plan for any objection was not permission. It was me. My habit of coming back. My habit of fixing the emergency after complaining about how it had been created. I saved the email as a PDF. Forwarded the thread to Helen. Then I sent Dad one final written notice. The words came more easily now. My previous assistance to Shaw was limited, informal, and task-specific. It did not authorize Shaw to represent me as an ongoing external advisor or future project resource. Please confirm removal of my name, Northline affiliation, photograph, and current credentials from active materials. I added one more sentence. I will not provide additional review, replacement wording, or project support while this remains unresolved. That was the first time I had written the thing I had spent years avoiding. Not just, I don't use my name. Also, I will not help you repair the consequences of using it. Dad did not answer. Not then. Instead, something unexpected happened at work. An invitation appeared on my calendar from my department head. Procurement Practice Training Initiative. I had been asked twice that year to lead an internal series for younger project managers. Twice, I had declined. The first time, Dad had been negotiating a supplier agreement, and kept calling after hours. The second, Camille had been preparing a major pitch and needed help anticipating procurement questions. I had told myself I was too busy. The truth was uglier. I had kept professional space empty because I assumed some part of it would eventually be needed by Shaw. I opened the invitation. The program would run one afternoon every other week. Version control. Vendor qualification. Scope discipline. Conflict documentation. All the habits Dad called excessive. I clicked accept. For a moment, nothing happened, except the calendar block turning solid. It should not have felt important. It did. The time was now occupied by something I had chosen before anyone at home could claim it. At 6:12 that evening, I was packing my laptop when another email arrived from Robert. There was one attachment. I knew from the file name that it was a PDF before I opened it. Shaw Consulting, confirmation Merit Shaw. My throat tightened. Helen's warning came back immediately. If they send you something to sign, do not sign it before we review what it is. I opened the document. It was only 2 pages. Simple. Clean. Almost reasonable. The first paragraph stated that I had historically provided strategic procurement advice to Shaw Architectural Millwork on an informal basis. The second said I would continue to provide limited strategic support if requested in connection with awarded projects. The third said no employment relationship was created. At the bottom was a signature line. My name was already typed underneath it. All it needed was my signature. Dad's email contained one sentence. Sign this, and all of this goes away. I read the document again. On the surface, it looked like compromise. No full-time role. No salary. Limited support. Family helping family. But that was not what signing it would do. It would turn years of isolated favors into a historical advisory relationship. It would tell the client that Shaw's representation had been essentially correct. It would tell Northline that the disclosure I had made on Monday was incomplete. And it would obligate future Merit to support a project current Merit had never agreed to join. For years, Dad's strongest weapon had not been anger. It had been making the easiest path look harmless. Just look at this. Just fix that sentence. Just help this once. Just sign. My cursor hovered over the document. I did not reply to Dad. Instead, I forwarded the PDF to Helen. I typed, I have not signed this and do not intend to sign it. Then I closed the document. My phone rang almost immediately. Mom. I let it ring. A voicemail arrived. Then another call. Camille. I let that one ring too. At 7, Elaine sent a text. Your father is trying to give you a way out. I read it while standing beside the elevator. A way out. The phrase nearly made me laugh. He had put my name somewhere without permission. Now I was being offered an escape from the problem by giving him permission afterward. The elevator opened. I stepped inside. Before the doors closed, another message appeared. Camille, can't you sign it for one project? Then everybody can move on. I typed my answer before I reached the lobby. It isn't a way out for me. It's a way out for him. I sent it. Outside, the evening air had turned cooler. Traffic moved along the street in red and white lines. People came through the revolving doors behind me, talking about dinner reservations and trains and children waiting at home. For once, I did not feel compelled to solve the next conversation before it happened. Dad had sent me a signature line because he believed that eventually I would choose peace over precision. He was right about the woman I had been for a very long time. He just had not noticed that she was getting harder to reach. By the time I got home, Elaine had left 3 voicemails. I listened to the first. Merit, call me, please. This has gone far enough. The second was sharper. Your father has given you a perfectly reasonable solution. I don't understand why you insist on treating him like he's done something terrible. The third came 20 minutes later. You know more about this language than any of us. If you don't like the document, then help us fix the wording. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand. There it was. The oldest door in the house. They did not need me to forgive them. They needed me to edit. I called Mom back. She answered on the first ring. Thank God, I listened to your messages. Then you understand what we're asking. Yes. Her voice softened. Good. Your father is upset, but this can still be fixed. Just tell us what language Northline needs. No. Silence. What? I'm not fixing the confirmation. You just said you understand. I understand exactly what you're asking. Merritt, don't be childish. I won't sign it, and I won't rewrite it. Then what do you expect your father to submit? The qualifications of the people who actually work for Shaw. Her breath caught. You're willing to jeopardize a major contract over wording? No. I'm refusing to create a relationship that doesn't exist. He is your father. Yes, and this is your family's company. It is his company. You helped build it. I did. Then why are you acting like none of that matters? I looked through the kitchen doorway toward the small dining table where I had once spent Sunday nights reviewing Shaw contracts long after leaving. It matters, I said. That's why I'm not pretending those favors were something else. Mom went quiet. When she spoke again, the softness was gone. You're going to regret making everything so black and white. Maybe. Camille was right. You always have to be difficult. I felt the old sting. It arrived. Then passed. Good night, Mom. Merritt. I ended the call. My hand shook once after the screen went dark. I put the phone on the counter until it stopped. The next morning, Robert finally responded. No apology. No correction confirmation. One sentence. The client needs clarification Friday. Decide whether you're part of this family before then. I read it standing beside my desk. Friday. A deadline. Of course, there was a deadline. Dad had always been strongest when he could turn time into guilt. I forwarded the message into my compliance file. Then I opened my calendar. The new training initiative sat there on Thursday afternoon, occupying a block of time I would once have considered available for a Shaw emergency. I left it exactly where it was. For the first time, Friday was not going to be a test of how quickly I could save my father. It was going to be a test of whether I could let him discover what his company was worth without my name attached to it. Friday sat on my calendar like a threat, even though, technically, it belonged to someone else. The Lang procurement team had asked Shaw Architectural Millwork for clarification. Shaw had until 10 that morning to identify the people who would actually support the project and correct anything in its submission that could not be verified. That was their deadline. Not mine. I repeated that to myself Thursday morning while standing in my kitchen with coffee cooling between my hands. My phone was face down beside the sink. Dad had sent nothing after his message the day before. Decide whether you're part of this family before then. He had reduced the problem perfectly. Not whether I was an advisor. Not whether Shaw had permission to use my title. Not whether signing his document could put my position at Northline at risk. Whether I was his daughter. For most of my life, Dad had been able to turn any disagreement into that question. If I refused to stay late at Shaw, was I committed to the family? If I took the Northline job, was I grateful for everything he had taught me? If I skipped Sunday dinner because I was exhausted, did I think I was too important for everyone now? The subject changed. The test never did. I was dressing for work when he called. I watched his name move across the screen. This time, I answered. Hi, Dad. You got my email. Yes. Then we don't need to spend all morning dancing around this. His voice was controlled. That worried me more than yelling would have. Dad became quiet when he thought the answer should be obvious. I'm not signing the confirmation, I said. You haven't even heard what I'm asking. I read what you're asking. No. You read a document. That document is the thing you want me to sign. He exhaled into the phone. Merritt, nobody is asking you to lie. I buttoned my jacket with one hand. Then removed the sentence saying, I've historically served as your advisor. You have advised us. I've helped you. Exactly. Those aren't the same thing. Only because you've decided this week that they aren't. The words landed with such confidence that for a moment I almost admired the structure of the argument. I had helped. Therefore, I was an advisor. I was an advisor. Therefore, putting me in the proposal was reasonable. If the proposal was reasonable, my objection was the disruption. A closed circle with me standing conveniently in the center. Helping you review one paragraph doesn't mean I'm available to your clients, I said. You've done more than one paragraph. I know. You've reviewed contracts, you've helped with vendors, you've fixed schedules. Yes. So, what exactly do you think an advisor does? I slipped my laptop into my bag. An advisor agrees to advise. Dad went silent. I continued, before he could change the question. There was no agreement, no scope, no approval from Northline, no commitment from me to support this bid. Oh, please. Northline. The contempt in his voice was familiar. What about Northline? They don't own you. No. You make it sound like you need permission to speak to your own father. I don't. Then stop hiding behind company policy. I set my bag on the kitchen counter. I'm not hiding behind it. I work there. I agreed to the policy. This isn't outside employment. You aren't getting paid. The policy covers unpaid advisory activity if there's an industry conflict. There was a short silence. Dad had not expected that answer. So now helping your own company is a conflict? It's not my company. He laughed once. Sharp. That's rich. It's yours. You spent years there. I did. I trained you. You did. You learned procurement because I put you in front of real problems when nobody else would give you that kind of responsibility. Some part of that was true. That made the sentence harder, not easier. Dad had taught me things. He had also used that fact like an invoice that never stopped accruing interest. I've never denied what I learned at Shaw. Then maybe show a little gratitude. There it is. What? The part where this stops being about the proposal. It was never just about a proposal. I closed my eyes. Exactly. He did not seem to hear the meaning. You're my daughter, Merritt. Yes. The word came out calmer than I felt. Then act like it. I looked around my kitchen. The pale stone counter I had chosen. The coffee maker I had bought after moving in. The narrow window over the sink with a view of brick, traffic, and one stubborn maple tree turning red earlier than the others. Nothing in that room had been selected by Robert Shaw. That is a relationship, I said. It isn't authorization. Dad stopped breathing loudly enough for me to hear. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. You know what? Fine. If you want to talk like a contract, we can talk like a contract. There are 40 people at Shaw whose paychecks depend on us landing work. I have a client asking one simple question. I have a document that answers it. And you are refusing to sign because you want to punish me. I haven't asked the client to reject your bid. You don't have to. You know exactly what happens when you pull your name. No, I don't. I don't score their proposals. You know what your name does for us. That sentence stopped me. Dad seemed to realize it too. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then he said more carefully, You have credibility. There it was. Not difficult. Not disappointing. Not the daughter who made everything harder. Credibility. Something worth putting on a page when money was attached to it. I gripped the counter. If my name matters that much, I said, you should have asked before using it. This is getting us nowhere. No, it's getting us exactly to the question. What question? Why did you think you didn't have to ask? He hung up. For several seconds, I kept the phone against my ear. Then I lowered it. My coffee had gone cold. I poured it out, rinsed the mug, and left for work. By 9:15, 3 relatives had texted me. A cousin I saw twice a year wrote that Dad had always been generous with me. An aunt asked whether it was true I was blocking Camille's company from a major contract. One of Mom's cousins sent a paragraph about forgiveness that contained no question at all. I did not need to ask how they had heard. Elaine had found a new route around my refusal to argue with her directly. I opened a blank note. The old version of me would have answered each person separately. I would have adjusted the explanation based on who they were. More gentle for older relatives. More detailed for anyone with a business background. Apologetic with people who loved Mom. Defensive with anyone who sounded like Dad. By lunchtime, I would have turned one boundary into 6 separate trials. Instead, I wrote 3 sentences. I have not asked any client to reject Shaw Architectural Millwork. I have only confirmed that I am not an employee or advisor and have not authorized my current professional credentials to be represented that way. I will not discuss the matter beyond that. I sent the same wording to the 3 people who had contacted me. Then I went back to work. A 4th message arrived 20 minutes later. I did not answer it. At Leon, Helen asked me to stop bu. She had the consulting confirmation open on one monitor. This is what your father sent? Yes. And you haven't signed it? No. Good. I sat across from her. Helen tapped the second paragraph. This language creates prospective support. That's straightforward. I saw that. The historical language is more complicated. Because it says I've already been advising them. Yes. She turned toward me. I want to be precise about something. We are not deciding whether your father is a good person or whether your past help had personal meaning. Compliance doesn't need to answer either question. I understand. We need to answer whether Northline had an employee engaged in outside advisory activity that should have been disclosed. And right now? Right now, your documents show occasional informal assistance with defined tasks. No compensation, no standing agreement, no evidence that you committed yourself as a resource to their clients. Relief moved through me, but Helen held up one finger. If you sign this, the facts change. I know. If you sign it, and later tell us you did so, only because your father pressured you, the facts still change. I understand. Good. She closed the document. Northline is preparing to protect its interests if Shaw continues using our name or your title after notice. The phrase made me sit straighter. Legal? If necessary. But that isn't your job. I almost smiled. That's what I told Dad. No. What you told your father is your business. I'm telling you something different. Helen folded her hands. You do not need to manage Northline's response for us. You disclosed the issue. You gave us documentation. You are not authorized to negotiate on our behalf. Do not become so determined to fix this yourself that you recreate the same problem in a different direction. That landed. The warning was fair. There was a difference between agency and taking responsibility for everything within reach. I won't. Good. Helen looked at me for another second. And merit? Yes? You're leading the training this afternoon, correct? I am. Then go do your actual job. I laughed before I could stop myself. Helen's mouth moved slightly at one corner. That's not a joke. I know. It still felt like permission. Not permission to stand up to Dad. Permission to stop making his emergency the largest thing in every room. The training room held 14 people. Most were project managers, with fewer than 5 years at Northline. 2 were senior associates who had transferred from other divisions. A screen filled the wall behind me. The subject was document control and procurement scope. If there was a more perfect topic for that week, I could not have invented it. I pulled up a sample bid comparison. Never assume 2 files are the same because the cover page is the same, I said. Check the revision history, check what changed, check who had authority to change it. A man near the back raised his hand. Do you really save every working version? A few people smiled. I thought of Dad. Do you need a written record of every breath you take? Yes, I said. The room laughed lightly. I added, not because every old version will matter. Most won't. But when scope changes, the prior version tells you where responsibility actually moved. One of the younger managers, Priya, leaned forward. How do you keep it from becoming impossible to track? Consistent file names, dates, clean notes, and don't write comments as if only present you will ever read them. She nodded and started typing. Something in my chest loosened. For years, the habits that made me good at my work had been treated at home like personality defects. Too exact, too cautious, too formal, too difficult. In that room, nobody asked me to make those qualities smaller. They were taking notes. When the session ended, Priya waited while the others filed out. That was useful, she said. Especially the part about scope. I always feel rude when I put limitations in writing. I smiled. I used to. What changed? The question was innocent. My answer almost came out too quickly. Experience. Instead, I considered it. I learned that clarity isn't rude just because somebody prefers ambiguity. Priya smiled. I may steal that. Go ahead. Afterward, 2 coworkers invited me to dinner at a small Italian place a few blocks away. My first instinct was to decline. Friday. Dad. The bid. The unsigned confirmation. Then I realized there was nothing I needed to do that evening. Nothing legitimate. I had already stated my position. So I went. For nearly an hour, nobody mentioned Shaw. We talked about a downtown project one colleague hated, Priya's obsession with terrible airport coffee, and whether Chicago had entered the season when everyone wore the wrong coat, because the morning and afternoon belonged to different climates. I laughed hard enough at one story that I forgot to check my phone. When I eventually did, I had 7 missed calls. 2 from Elaine, 3 from Dad, 2 from Camille. A familiar wave of urgency hit me. My chair shifted back half an inch before I noticed. One of my coworkers glanced over. "You okay?" "Yes." I put the phone face down and stayed for dessert. Dad called again at 7:46. I answered only after I had reached my condo. "What?" I said. Not rude. Not soft. Just a question. "You've made your point." His voice sounded rougher than it had that morning. I didn't know I was making one. "Don't. Then tell me why you're calling." For a moment, all I heard was the faint background hum from his office. I recognized it. Dad was still at Shaw. "You know the Lang package matters." "Yes." "You know what we've invested this year." "No, I don't." That stopped him. I waited. "We took additional space." "What additional space?" "The east unit beside the shop." I knew the unit. Another tenant had occupied it for years. Dad continued. "We signed for equipment. We're expanding capacity." "When?" "Over the last few months." I moved to the kitchen table and sat down. "Because of this bid?" "Not just this bid." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you keep acting like this is some theoretical issue. It isn't. I have commitments." His use of "I" caught my attention. "Not we." "What commitments?" "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Start auditing me." "You brought it up." He exhaled. "We have more space. More capacity coming online. A hiring plan. Lang was supposed to be the anchor that showed the expansion made sense." "Supposed to be?" "We have a strong bid. That doesn't make it guaranteed." "No, Merritt. Nothing is guaranteed. That's how business works." I let the irony pass. "You made those decisions before you won the project." "We made them because we have a pipeline. Then the pipeline should survive one bid." "You know that's not how growth works." I did know. That was why procurement people made scenario plans. That was why you did not treat projected revenue as cash. That was why you did not list uncommitted resources as committed ones. Dad lowered his voice. "I believed we finally had a seat at that table." The sentence sounded different from everything before it. For a moment, I heard the man who had built Shaw from a rented workshop. The man who used to come home with sawdust on his shoes. The man who had taught me to read vendor exclusions because, as he once said, the expensive words were often the ones nobody noticed. Understanding him would have been easier if he had been entirely wrong about everything. He wasn't. He had built something. He had taken risks. He had employed people. He had also decided those facts gave him rights over me. "One signature," Dad said. "That's all I'm asking." I closed my eyes. One signature protects 40 families. There it was. My stomach tightened. "Everyone is counting on you." At 26, I had heard almost the same words in Shaw's old conference room. I had been wearing a Navy suit because I had an interview that afternoon for a professional certification program connected to a larger construction firm. An equipment failure had thrown production behind. Dad needed a revised supplier and installation schedule. "I have to leave by 1, I had told him. "Everyone is counting on you." I missed the interview. For years, I had remembered that day as proof that I was loyal. Standing in my condo 14 years later, I saw something else. Nobody had forced me to stay. Dad had asked, in the way he always asked. He made leaving feel like an injury I was choosing to cause. I had completed the rest myself. "I can't protect those employees by misrepresenting my role," I said. "You are not misrepresenting anything. Then why do you need my signature now?" Silence. Dad recovered quickly. "To satisfy a bureaucratic process." "No. Merritt. You need my signature because you don't already have it." His voice hardened. "You've become unbelievably arrogant." "No, I've become specific." "You think that Northline title makes you better than everyone who stayed?" No. You sure act like it. I am not asking you to call me impressive. I'm asking you to stop calling me part of a project team I'm not on. You really don't care what happens here, do you? That question hurt more than the accusation. Because I did care. I cared about the shop floor supervisors I remembered. I cared about Elaine sitting in the office where she had worked beside Dad for decades. I even cared about Camille, despite everything. And I cared about Robert Shaw. That was precisely why this had worked for so long. I care, I said. Could have fooled me. Caring doesn't make the answer yes. Dad went quiet. Then his voice dropped to something almost flat. If this goes wrong, don't tell yourself you had nothing to do with it. The sentence sat between us. He wanted me to pick it up, carry it, keep it ready for whatever happened Friday. I left it where he put it. You made the expansion commitments, I said. He hung up. Thursday night, the consulting confirmation waited in my inbox. I opened it again. Not because I had changed my mind. Because I wanted to understand why the temptation still existed. My signature line was on the second page. Merritt Shaw. A blank white space above it. I imagined typing my name. The immediate consequences were easy to picture. Dad's anger would end. Mom would call and tell me she knew I would do the right thing. Camille would stop treating the wedding as the moment I had ruined her first week of marriage. Shaw could tell the procurement team the advisory relationship had been confirmed. The relatives who had messaged me would never learn enough details to question the simpler story. Merritt had come around. The reliable daughter had returned to her assigned position. Then I imagined Monday, walking into Northline, telling Helen I had signed a document stating that a historical advisory relationship existed after I had spent the week documenting that it did not. Explaining that I agreed to future support on a bid involving a company in the same industry. Explaining why protecting Dad had seemed more urgent than protecting an employment agreement I had signed myself. That was the part my parents never had to absorb. Every time they asked me to save them from discomfort, I was expected to place the risk somewhere else, usually on myself. I shut the PDF. Then I did something that had nothing to do with Shaw. I walked into my spare bedroom. For 4 years, I had called it the second bedroom even though no one had slept there. One wall was lined with boxes. Shaw sample books. Old binders. Product catalogs. A carton marked DAD may need. Another marked proposals. I stood in the doorway. The room had become storage for an obligation I no longer officially had. I opened the first box. Nothing dramatic happened. No buried secret. No missing document. Just old samples and binders I had kept because throwing them out felt strangely disloyal. I sorted slowly. Anything relevant to the current dispute went into one archive container. Old public brochures went there too. Things I had no business retaining were set aside for proper disposal or return. Expired sample books went into recycling. By 11, I could see the floor along the wall. I dragged a small chair from my bedroom into the space. Then I ordered the bookshelf I had been looking at online for almost 6 months. I had always closed the page before checkout. Too indulgent. No time to reorganize. Maybe Dad will need those boxes first. This time, I pressed place order. It was not expensive. It was not revenge. It was a bookshelf. But when the confirmation email arrived, I felt more satisfaction than I had expected. For once, the space in my home was being assigned according to what I wanted to put in it. Friday morning, I woke at 6. No messages from Dad. At 7:12, Camille texted. Please just talk to him before 10. I replied. I already have. At 7:38, Elaine wrote. You still have time to stop this. I stared at the words. Stop this. As if the event currently moving toward a deadline was me, not the proposal. Not the inaccurate personnel claim. Me. I did not respond. At 8:20, Helen emailed asking only whether my position had changed. No. I have not signed the confirmation and will not be providing support to the bid. Her answer came 2 minutes later. Understood. That was all. No applause. No rescue. The decision remained mine. At 9:15, Dad called. He let it ring. At 9:23, he called again. At 9:31, I answered. His first words were, "We can still get this submitted." I know. I've had Elaine revise the rest of the personnel page. Good. We only need confirmation from you. No. Merritt, listen to me. I am listening. You're going to sit there and let this happen over one paragraph. It's not one paragraph. It is to the client. No. It's a representation about who is available to do the work. I can limit your involvement. You don't get to decide my involvement. His breath came hard through the phone. We can say you'll advise only if necessary. No. Quarterly. No. Only on procurement risk. No. You wouldn't even have to attend meetings. No. Merritt. I looked at the clock on my laptop. 9:34. I don't know how else to answer you. You know exactly what you're doing. Yes. That stopped him. I had never said it that plainly. Not defensive. Not apologetic. I knew. I was letting the bid reach clarification without lending him my name. Dad's voice became very quiet. Then don't come crying when this family is done with you. My throat tightened. There were sentences you could hear at 40 and still receive with the body of a child. For a few seconds, I saw the old Shaw office. The kitchen table. The client dinners. Sunday folders. Christmas contracts. Every version of myself who had stayed 10 minutes longer because she thought leaving meant she loved them less. I swallowed. That's your choice. Dad said nothing. Mine is not signing. I ended the call. My hand shook badly enough that I had to place the phone on the desk. 9:41. 19 minutes. I opened the consulting confirmation. The blank line waited. I could still end the pressure. I could sign and tell myself I would deal with Northline afterward. Maybe Helen would understand. Maybe the policy issue would be manageable. Maybe Shaw would not win anyway. Maybe Dad would never ask again. I almost laughed at the last one. He would ask again. That was the only part I knew with certainty. Not because he was uniquely cruel, because every time the system worked, it taught him to use it again. A difficult project appeared. Dad called. I objected. He invoked loyalty. I helped. The project survived. My resentment became my private problem. His assumption became stronger. I moved the cursor away from the signature line. At 9:47, I opened a new email to Dad. I will not sign. Your proposal has to stand on the team you actually have. I read it once. Sent it. Then I closed the document. 9:48. 12 minutes remained. Nothing happened. That was the strangest part. No thunder. No legal notice. No one burst through the office door. I had imagined saying no for years, as if it would feel like detonating something. Instead, my screen showed an ordinary Friday morning. At 9:51, Camille called. I declined. At 9:54, Elaine called. Declined. At 9:57, Dad's name appeared. I watched until it disappeared. At 10, the clock changed. He sat still. 10:01. 10:02. Somewhere across the city, people were working. Orders were being placed. Contracts were being signed. Coffee was being poured. A truck backed into the loading area below Northline and beeped 3 times. 10:04. An automated email appeared in the folder, where I had been copied on the verification chain. Clarification period closed. I read the line twice. For nearly 2 decades, one of Dad's deadlines had always become my emergency before it reached 0. This one reached 0 without me. And the world did not end. It simply became his problem again. For the first few days after the clarification period closed, nothing happened. That unsettled me more than another argument would have. I went to work Monday expecting Dad to call before I reached my desk. He did not. Tuesday passed without a message from Mom. Camille did not send another plea, accusation, or photograph designed to remind me what I had supposedly walked away from. The silence followed me through meetings and grocery shopping, and the first evening I assembled the new bookshelf in my spare room. Every time my phone lit up, some part of my body prepared for impact. Most of the notifications were ordinary. A calendar reminder. A delivery update. A message from Priya asking whether I could send her the file name convention from the training session. By Wednesday evening, I realized I had checked the family group chat only once. It was still muted. Nobody had removed me. Nobody had addressed me either. The old version of myself would have taken that as an invitation to repair the silence. I did not. I finished the bookshelf. The room changed faster than I expected. Once the Shaw boxes were reduced to one labeled archive container, the wall behind them looked strangely large. I put the new shelves there, added the project management books I actually used, a framed photograph from a trip to Seattle with 2 college friends, and the ceramic bowl I had bought at a street market years earlier but never found a place for. There was nothing dramatic about any of it. Still, every object I chose made the room feel less like space. I was temporarily keeping available for someone else's emergency. At work, the internal review remained open. Helen did not call me in every morning to reassure me. Compliance did not function that way. Instead, she sent one short message late in the second week. "Can you stop by when you have 15 minutes? I went upstairs just after lunch. Helen had a thin paper file beside her laptop. "Sit," she said. I did. She opened the file. "We've reviewed what you disclosed, the version history you provided, the emails showing the scope of your prior assistance, and the consulting confirmation you declined to sign." My fingers tightened once around the edge of the chair. Helen continued. "We don't have evidence that you were engaged in an undisclosed outside advisory role as Shaw represented it." The tension in my shoulders eased so slowly I noticed it only because my back touched the chair. "What happens now?" "We retain the record. That's it?" "For the internal concern involving you, yes." She looked at me over her glasses. "You disclosed promptly after learning about the representation. Your supporting records are consistent with what you told us. You did not sign the document they later sent. Unless new information comes in, we don't have a basis for employee discipline." I released a breath. Helen watched me do it. "I know that probably sounds less dramatic than the last 2 weeks felt. Less dramatic is fine." "Good." She closed the folder. "One thing I want you to remember." I waited. "You didn't solve this by proving that you had never helped your parents." "No. You solved your part by being accurate about what you did and what you didn't do." The distinction struck deeper than I expected. For days, part of me had been ashamed of the old emails. The contract comments, the supplier questions, the Sunday favors. They had made the situation messier. It would have been emotionally convenient if I could have said I had left Shaw and never lifted a finger for them again. That was not true. I had helped. Repeatedly. Sometimes against my better judgment. Sometimes because I wanted to. Sometimes because Dad knew exactly which sentence would make me stay. Helen pushed the file slightly away. "Someone else's overstatement doesn't require you to rewrite your own history in the other direction." I nodded. "Thank you." She gave me the smallest shake of her head. "You did what the policy required. That's not a personal favor from me." Oddly, that made me smile. "Right." As I stood, Helen added, "Your second training session is next week." I know. I heard good things about the first. That pleased me more than I wanted her to see. "I'll try not to ruin the streak. You'll survive." Back at my desk, I sat for a moment without opening another file. No champagne. No congratulatory email from Victor Lang. No executive announcement that I had defeated anyone. Just a compliance file closing because I had told the truth early enough and kept records clear enough for someone else to understand it. For most of my life, I had associated relief with fixing a crisis for someone else. That afternoon, relief came from knowing I had not sacrificed myself to fix one. 2 days later, Camille asked to meet. Her text arrived at 6:14 in the evening. "Can we talk without Dad or Mom?" I stared at the words. There was no apology attached. No explanation. I considered saying no. Instead, I wrote, "Coffee Saturday morning, 1 hour." She chose a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Camille was already seated when I arrived. No wedding makeup, no sleek sales suit. Jeans, a cream sweater, hair pulled into a low knot. For several seconds, I saw my little sister rather than the woman who had introduced me as a family cautionary tale. Then she looked at the chair across from her. "Thanks for coming." I sat. "You asked." She rubbed her thumb along the cardboard sleeve around her coffee. Dad didn't want me to. I assumed that. Her eyes lifted. You always do that. What? Say things like you're reading a report. I almost smiled. We've had that conversation. Yeah. She looked down again. A server set my coffee on the table. I waited. If Camille wanted the conversation, she could carry the first difficult part. Eventually, she said, they made us resubmit the personnel qualifications. I figured they might. Without you. Yes. She looked irritated by the simplicity of my answer. They asked for clarification on everyone listed as key support. That's normal. I know it's normal. I took a sip of coffee. Then, what did you want to tell me? Her mouth tightened. Dad thinks I shouldn't tell you anything about the bid. Then don't. She blinked. You don't want to know? I won't ask you to violate anything you're supposed to keep confidential. Merritt, I'm not talking about some state secret. Then say what you came to say. Camille looked around the cafe, as if checking whether anyone had heard. The revised submission looks weaker. I did not answer. She continued. We have qualified people. I'm not saying we don't, but your background gave the package something we don't have internally. What? She looked at me. Big project procurement credibility. There it was again. The value that existed whenever they needed to sell it. You knew that before the wedding, I said. Camille's cheeks colored. I knew your resume was strong. That isn't what I asked. She exhaled. I knew you were listed. You already told me that. I know. Did you know Dad hadn't asked me? I told you. I assumed he had. And did you ever check? No. Why? Her eyes moved toward the window. I waited. The silence stretched long enough for the espresso machine behind the counter to hiss twice. Then Camille said, because I didn't want the answer to be no. That was the first thing she had said that morning that surprised me. She picked at the edge of her cup sleeve. If I asked Dad whether you agreed, and he said no, then I'd know we were using it anyway. I kept my hands around my cup. So you didn't ask? No. Because the proposal was better with me in it. Her jaw tightened. Yes. The word was barely audible. He sat back. She rushed on. I wasn't trying to steal your career, Merritt. I didn't say you were. You make it sound like I sat there planning this. I don't think you planned it. She looked relieved too quickly. I continued. I think you saw something that benefited you, and chose not to ask the question that might make you give it up. The relief disappeared. That's not fair. It is exactly what you just told me. Dad runs the company, and you're head of sales. I don't control technical staffing. You knew what you were selling. Camille's gaze sharpened. You really enjoy this, don't you? The accusation caught me off guard. Enjoy what? Being right. I nearly answered the way I always had. No, of course not. I'm sorry. This is awful for me too. Instead, I asked, do you think I wanted my employer asking whether I'd hidden an outside consulting relationship? She looked away. No. Do you think I wanted to find my photograph in a proposal I hadn't seen? No. Then don't make my refusal to clean it up for you into pleasure. Camille rubbed both palms over her knees. After a moment, she said, Dad is scared. I know. The expansion was more aggressive than I realized. He told me some of it. Her eyebrows rose. He did? Additional shop space, equipment, hiring plan. He didn't tell you about all of that before? No. She stared at me for a moment, and then laughed once without humor. Of course he didn't. I didn't ask what she meant. If she wanted to explain, she could. Instead, Camille looked at me and said, You know what I keep thinking about? What? The wedding. My stomach tightened. She gave a small, embarrassed shake of her head. I introduced you like you were the sister who couldn't make anything work. You did. And that same week, I was selling your Lang project as evidence that our company had access to someone who could handle complicated work. I said nothing. Camille looked down. I didn't think about how ugly that was until after. The apology still had not arrived. But neither had an excuse. I let her keep going. I thought you didn't care what we thought of you. I almost laughed. Why? Because you left. That didn't mean I stopped caring. You acted like you didn't. No, Camille. I acted like someone who had learned that admitting I cared gave everyone another handle. Her eyes filled, but she blinked quickly. and looked toward the window. I felt the old instinct to comfort her. I did not obey it. She had the right to feel whatever she felt. I did not have to remove it. After a long pause, Camille said, "I'm sorry I made that joke." I watched her. For the joke? For the wedding? For knowing your name was in the bid, and not asking. That was better. Not complete, but better. "What happens now?" she asked. "With us?" She nodded. "I don't know." Her face fell. I continued before guilt could change my answer. "I don't want business questions from Shaw. I don't want messages asking me to fix documents. I don't want you bringing me into something because Dad says it's fine. I understand. And if we're going to have any relationship outside that company, it can't depend on me pretending this was just Dad." Camille stiffened slightly. "I didn't say it was just Dad. You've spent 2 weeks saying he handled it." She looked down. Fair. It was the closest thing to accountability I had heard from her in years. When we stood to leave, Camille hesitated. "Are you coming to Mom's birthday next month?" The question pulled something tight inside me. A month earlier, I would have answered before I knew what I wanted. "I haven't decided." Camille looked disappointed. "Elit here." On the drive home, I realized I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, but it was a clean kind of tired. I had not saved her from guilt. I had not punished her either. For once, I had left a conversation without carrying both sides home. 3 days later, Dad asked me to come to the house. His email was almost formal. "We need to discuss this in person. One time. No more emails." I replied, "One conversation. I will not discuss signing or reviewing Shaw documents." He answered, "Fine." Saturday afternoon, I drove to the house where I had spent most of my 20s believing endurance was maturity. Mom opened the door. Her face looked older than it had at the wedding. "Merit." "Hi, Mom." She stepped aside. Dad was waiting at the dining room table. The same table where I had normalized supplier quotes at 23. The same table where Christmas dinners regularly turned into business meetings because Robert Shaw could not see the boundary between the company and the people sitting around it. Camille was not there. I had expected that. I put my bag on the chair beside me and sat across from Dad. He looked at the folder in my hand. "You brought paperwork." "Yes." He laughed bitterly. "Of course you did." Mom sat beside him. "I hope we're not going to spend all afternoon arguing over versions." "We don't need all afternoon." I opened the folder. Dad leaned back. I placed revision 3 on the table. "This is the capability statement Elaine asked me to review." Then revision 6. "This is the later public version." Dad said nothing. I placed the printed email beside them. "Leave Merit in the technical section. Clients know the Lang job. If we get into trouble, she'll help us, like she always does." His jaw tightened. Last came the consulting confirmation. Unsigned. 4 items. Nothing else. "I am not here to convince you that I never helped Shaw," I said. "I did." Mom moved as if to speak. I kept going. I reviewed contracts. I answered vendor questions. I fixed wording. Sometimes I offered before anyone asked. "That's true." Dad folded his arms. "Then what's the point of this performance?" "The point is that this version," I touched revision 3, "shows what I agreed to review." Then I touched revision 6. "This version shows what Shaw later represented." "Everything on that page was true," Dad said. "The projects were true. Your title was true." "Yes." "The Lang project was true." "Yes." "Your experience was true." "Yes." "Then stop calling it false. The relationship wasn't true." His eyes narrowed. "You advised us. I helped you. Same difference." "No." Mum Sahil. "Merit. Normal people don't draw these distinctions inside a family." I looked at her. "Normal companies do when they submit qualifications to clients." "This again." "Yes, Mom. This again. Because the proposal wasn't a Thanksgiving conversation." Dad tapped the printed email. "You really think this proves something? It proves you chose to keep me in the materials because clients knew the Lang project." "I never denied that." "And you wrote that if Shaw got into trouble I'd help. Because you always did." There was no shame in his voice. Only certainty. Something inside me went very still. For years, I had imagined that if I found the right document, Dad would see it and understand what he had done. I had been wrong about the purpose of evidence. It could establish facts. It could not force conscience. That's the entire problem, I said. What is? You thought my past behavior was permanent permission. Dad gave me a disgusted look. You make helping your own father sound like exploitation. No, I'm saying the help belonged to the moments when I chose to give it. You're my daughter, and my name is still mine. The room went silent. Mom's hand tightened around the edge of the table. Dad stared at me. I had expected anger. What I saw first was disbelief. As if ownership had been so obvious to him that hearing it denied sounded absurd. He leaned forward. Do you know what that company paid for when you were growing up? I almost smiled, though nothing was funny. There it is. What? The invoice. His face hardened. I paid for your college, and I have always been grateful. I gave you your start. I've said that too. Then what more do you want? Nothing. That seemed to confuse him more than anything else. I don't want part of Shaw. I don't want your position. I don't want money. I don't want Victor Lang to punish you. I don't even want you to agree that I'm right. Mom stared at me. Then why are you doing this? Because I don't want what belongs to me used without asking. Dad pushed back from the table. Your precious name. Yes. He laughed harshly. Yes, Dad. My name. For the first time, I did not feel embarrassed saying it. I gathered the papers. Dad looked at the unsigned confirmation. You could still have fixed this. No. You chose not to. Yes. The word sat there without apology. I stood. Mom rose too. So you're just leaving, I said one conversation. Merritt, your father has barely slept. I looked at her. I'm sorry he's under pressure. Then act like it. I can care that he's under pressure without signing something that puts me at risk. You always have an answer. I put the folder into my bag. No, I just stopped treating your disappointment as proof that my answer is wrong. Mom's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dad looked toward the window. I waited for him to tell me I was no longer welcome. He didn't. Maybe he had already learned that threat no longer worked as well as it once had. I walked out, without asking whether I should come back for dinner. The bid decision arrived weeks later. Not to me. I was not a bidder, and had no right to Shaw's evaluation. Camille called on a Tuesday evening. Her first sentence was enough. We didn't get it. I stood beside the bookshelf in my spare room with a stack of training materials in my hands. I'm sorry. She went quiet. You mean that? Yes. I thought you'd be happy. I wanted my name removed. I didn't need Shaw to lose. Camille exhaled. The debrief said the revised team was weaker than the original submission. I sat in the chair. What else? Another bidder had stronger committed resources and a lower delivery risk score. That made sense. No billionaire revenge. No blacklist. No dramatic punishment. A procurement team had asked Shaw to stand behind the resources it actually controlled. When my name came out, the evaluation changed. How's Dad? I asked. You know, that isn't an answer. He's furious. At me. At everyone. I could picture it because I knew him, but I did not pretend to know what happened inside a room where I had not been. Camille continued. The hiring plan is frozen. What about the extra shop space? They're trying to postpone part of the expansion. And the equipment? Dad said one of the commitments may have to be transferred or resold. I don't know the details. I closed my eyes briefly. Those were real consequences. Not ruin. Not bankruptcy. A company pulling back after an expansion plan did not land the anchor work it expected. Exactly the kind of thing Dad had spent years teaching me to plan around for other people. I hope they work it out, I said. Camille was quiet. You're really not coming back to help, are you? There it was. Even after everything. Not malicious. Almost reflexive. No. She let out a slow breath. I knew you were going to say that. Then why ask? Habit, I guess. I looked around the room. The Shaw archive box sat inside the closet now, labeled and closed. The shelves held my books. A plant Priya had brought after I mentioned reorganizing the room sat near the window, leaning slightly toward the afternoon light. That's what I'm trying to change too, I said. A few days later, Dad called. I had just finished dinner. His name appeared on the screen for the first time since our meeting. I answered. He skipped the greeting. I hope you're happy. The old response rose so quickly it was almost spoken before I caught it. I'm not. I never wanted this. You know I love you. I didn't make them reject you. All the sentences designed to prove I was still a good daughter. I let them pass through me without giving them my voice. I hope Shaw builds its next chapter with the people who actually work there. Dad laughed once. That's something they teach you at Northline? No. So that's it? The question was quieter. For one dangerous second, I heard something beneath it that made me want to soften everything. Then I remembered that softness and surrender were not the same thing. For now, yes, you're choosing a job over your own parents. No. I'm choosing not to work for your company without agreeing to. You know what I mean. I do. He waited. So did I. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of the documents. No promise not to repeat the behavior. Eventually Dad said, Your mother misses you. I miss her too. You have a strange way of showing it. Missing someone doesn't mean every boundary disappears. He sighed. I don't recognize you anymore. Mom had said almost the same thing weeks earlier. This time, the sentence did not frighten me. Maybe that's okay. Dad hung up. I placed the phone beside me. Then I finished my dinner while it was still warm. 3 months later, I stood in a Northline conference room watching Priya explain version control to a group of new hires. She used almost the same line I had given her. Clarity isn't rude just because somebody prefers ambiguity. From the back row, I covered a smile. Afterward, she walked over. You heard that? I did. You said I could steal it. I did. She handed me a folder. You're still coming to the association meeting next week, right? Yes. For years, I had paid dues to the Regional Procurement Association and attended maybe one event every 18 months. There was always a reason. A Shaw emergency. Sunday dinner. A document Dad needed. Camille preparing for a client pitch. Now I had volunteered to organize a small mentoring roundtable for women working in procurement, vendor management, and construction operations. Nothing grand. 12 seats. One conference room. Coffee. A discussion about how to build authority without becoming the person everyone quietly dumped responsibility onto. For once, I knew exactly why I had volunteered. Not because someone needed me, because I wanted to be there. Northline's internal advancement process had also moved forward. It had started before Camille's wedding, which mattered to me. No Victor Lang phone call. No sudden executive favor. No reward for surviving a family fight. The review considered the work I had already done, the programs I had led, the results of projects I could actually document. When my department head told me I would be taking on a broader regional procurement portfolio, I thanked her and asked 3 questions about authority, resources, and expectations before accepting. She smiled after the third. You really do want scope on everything. Yes, so I've heard. There was no insult in it. Only recognition. At home, the spare room became the place where I prepared the mentoring sessions. Sometimes I read there. Sometimes I did absolutely nothing useful. That last part took practice. One Sunday afternoon, I sat in the chair beside the window with coffee and a novel, while my phone remained untouched in the kitchen. Halfway through a chapter, a message arrived. Camille, Mom's birthday is Saturday. No pressure. If you want to come, I'll make sure nobody talks business. I read it twice. Months earlier, the phrase no pressure would have made me suspicious. Now I considered only what I wanted. I wrote, I'll come for dinner. If Dad brings up Shaw, I'll leave. Camille answered, Understood. That was not reconciliation. It was not forgiveness. It was one boundary communicated and, for the moment, accepted. I could work with that. Dad had not apologized. Mom still occasionally sent messages that began with, Your father only wanted. I stopped replying to those. When she asked how I was doing without attaching a defense of him, I answered. Camille and I spoke occasionally. She never asked me to review another proposal. That mattered more than a dramatic speech would have. I did not know whether any of them would become the people I once wanted them to be. For the first time, I no longer needed to know before deciding what kind of life to build. One evening, nearly half a year after the wedding, I stayed late at Northline to finish a project charter for the new regional portfolio. The office had emptied around me. City lights reflected across the glass. At the bottom of the document was an approval line. I reviewed the scope one last time. Authority, responsibilities, reporting structure, everything clear. Then I typed my name. Merritt Shaw. For years, the people closest to me had treated that name like something they could diminish when they did not need it and borrow whenever they did. At Camille's wedding, I thought Victor Lang recognizing me would be the moment that proved them wrong. It wasn't. The moment that changed my life had happened weeks later, alone at my desk, when another document had waited for the same name and I had left the line blank. That was when I understood the difference. My worth had never depended on whether my parents were proud of me. My name had never required their permission to mean something. And helping the people I loved had never meant handing them permanent ownership of the woman I had become. I signed the project charter. Not for Dad. Not for Camille. Not for Shaw Architectural Millwork. For work I had chosen, under terms I understood. With my own name exactly where I wanted it. For the first time, that was enough.